Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome once again to RTI's Advanced Control University. My name is Tyler Nelson, National Product Trainer for RTI, and with me today is the man, the myth, the legend, Mr. Paul Key, Lead Integration Engineer for RTI. What we're going to do today is something a little bit different with our trainings. We started yesterday with our Zigbee-based training. What we're going to do is what we're calling them RTI Tech Talks, where we're going to go through specific areas of RTI, whether it's drivers or specific technologies, and I'm going to more or less interview, and we're going to kind of walk through what's available with that device or with that product, driver, etc., to make sure that your questions are answered regarding it, and as well as answer questions on the fly and kind of give you an overview of the overall technology itself. And today's not going to be any different. We're going to kind of go back and forth here between Paul and I, and please submit your questions in the question and answer section of the webinar. And we're going to go over the new RTI AD-64 driver, and I'm sure we'll have a lot of questions regarding the firmware and things of that nature. We'll talk about that towards the end. But today's training is going to run about an hour, maybe an hour and a half depending on questions, and it is going to be recorded, so you will be able to access this in the near future. What we'll do is I'm going to just kind of give you a brief overview of the RTI audio distribution equipment, as well as what's available for you to finish those projects. And then we'll start asking Paul some questions regarding the driver itself and things of that nature. So again, if you have questions, please do submit them onto the question and answer section, and especially if they're topic related. If they're not, don't worry, we will get to them, but probably towards the end. So once again, thank you for your time and investment in learning more about RTI, and let's get rocking and rolling with this. So as you may or may not know, RTI has had a couple of very, very successful pieces of equipment in our audio distribution category here, the 84 and the 88, starting with the 84 and the 88, and now progressing to the 84X and the 88X. And what you're getting with these units is a very reliable, very easy to integrate piece of equipment. Class D amplifiers, full spectrum, goes head to head with anybody out there. It's perfect for those in-wall, in-ceiling type of applications. That you're getting the type of power, the type of sound quality that your client deserves for those whole business type of applications. You're going to have those independent zone and tonal frequency abilities. You have the ability to control it via IP, RS-232, IR. You can scale it up to 64 zones of total audio. You can rack mount them. They've got the feet that come with them. So you're getting some really high quality class of amplification here for those distribution audio systems. And more specifically, the 84X is a 4x4 system where you're going to get 4 in, 4 out with pre-outs, as well as source input trim. You're also, like I said before, have the ability to have those independent volume tone controls. But we've added some very cool features that we're going to talk about a little bit today, such as group zone commands as one of them, including a doorbell function to go along with it. So the 84X and then the 88X, which really can expand your project above and beyond the horizon, because you're getting an 8 in, 8 out, again with fixed and variable pre-outs. You're going to have the ability to expand this up to 8 additional units, so 64 total zones. Not to mention the fact that we can do group zoning command, we can do IP control, we can have independent volume and tonal frequency control. We have a web-based interface to test the audio output during setup on, say, a computer, a smartphone, or a tablet. We have a web-based interface to be able to group the zones together, and that's actually true on both units, the 84X and the 88X. So you are getting quite a bit in terms of the overall equipment to be able to provide. But if you do have those devices or those projects that are going to be requiring a little bit more power in terms of power, we do have some very cool power, no pun intended there, amplifiers, excuse me, the CP450 and the CP1650, where you're going to get up to about 50 watts per channel on either 4 or 16 channels. But the really cool thing about the 1650 is that it's bridgeable up to 100 watts per channel. So if you really need to get some serious power going, that's your answer right there. Having voltage triggers, RS-232, IR control, being able to have full control. But the real key on all of this is being able to have an easy integration within the project. So, and that's really what you offer, because we do provide the drivers for both of those units, the audio distribution, as well as the amplifiers, as well as a source. What good is audio distribution without any sort of source? So that's where the RTI dock comes in. And having an iPod docking station such as this, a lot of people say, oh good, you've got one too, but what really sets ours aside from anybody else out there is how easy it is to integrate with the system and how user-friendly the GUI is. And being able to control it via IP, RS-232, IR, allowing easy access and full navigation of the client's iDevice through that GUI, or even be able to have RTI sync technology so you have the ability to browse the iTunes library and make real-time changes. You really have the ability to do quite a bit of control as well as offer the client. And I almost like to call this the easy add-on sale, because how many of those clients out there have an old school iPod that's just sitting in a drawer they paid an arm and a leg for? Probably 98% of them. So why not use that and be able to have something that's a half width, 1U type of unit that you can throw two of these into a rack and have all of their music, so they've got a music server ready to go right there with a tray load. But I keep mentioning the ease of integration and the ability to do that, and what that really comes from is Integration Designer, our one-stop shop for being able to program every single area within RTI. Although our audio distribution units are very, very third-party friendly, where we can use them with pretty much anybody, if you're going to be doing them within RTI and with our devices and products, Integration Designer offers you an easy way to be able to program it, an easy way to be able to control it. It's a 20-year in development type of programming atmosphere that's in constant development. And with the constant development, we keep adding features to drivers, updating them, being able to give the client the ability to fully control. And some of what we'll talk about with Paul today regarding the audio distribution driver, the AD-64 driver, is a direct correlation with what is available now in Integration Designer and how easy it is to integrate into those client systems. That being said, we also want to make sure that it's easy for the client to use, and with Integration Designer we can provide them what's called the continuity of the user interface, where they understand the ability from device to device and have the same look and feel and the same ability to control either on a room-by-room basis or an overall project scope. Maybe they've got their handheld controller in their master bedroom, the in-wall controller's in the living room, but the virtual panel is for every single room to control all the zones of audio. So we're going to show you a couple of different examples here today utilizing the virtual panel to show you how that can be used. The real key on this is having Integration Designer being able to program every single aspect of this area reduces the amount of overhead costs you're going to have to incur by jumping to different programs to be able to program each device. But in addition to that, you can make them look and feel the same if you so desire. It's fully customizable, but if you do make them look and feel the same, the client's going to understand where everything works, where everything lies, and they're going to be happy, and they're going to have greater satisfaction overall. And if they understand how the equipment works and they understand how to operate it, they're going to use it, and they're going to brag about it, and then they're going to refer you and your company to being able to get additional sales. So, like I said, each one of these products is very, very integration friendly, and that really comes from the drivers. And really what Paul and the team here at RTI do is develop these drivers based around what the client needs, how easy it is for you to integrate these into the client's everyday life. So with that, why don't we start talking a little bit about the overall driver development within RTI. And Paul, if you wouldn't mind, kind of what's the process and what's needed for RTI to be able to write a driver?
Well, I think that obviously it's the drivers that get developed are the ones that are the most demanded, that most people have the most dealers will actually have the use for. So that comes from a couple of places. The general suggestions that we get from dealers, both on and off the forum. A lot of the suggestions we come from distributors. Distributors have a real hand on what peripheral devices are being sold, which ones RTI drivers and RTI dealers in particular are using, and so that's where that comes from. And in fact, also just general strategic, trying to make sure that we have all the bases covered. One of the things, just in a meeting a week or so ago, we were looking across the spectrum, seeing that we don't actually have a driver at this point for an irrigation system. So we're starting to look at that. But so it starts with demand, things that customers want. You also have to you need the support of the manufacturer, both in the fact that the device has to be controllable externally. They have to let you do it, and they have to be interested in helping you both with technical issues and with the equipment itself. We won't do a driver for a system that isn't here, that we can't test, that we can't try. Matter of fact, for many of the common ones, we have several of them, or 2 or 3 different models, that sort of thing. So most of the manufacturers are interested in that sort of integration, so they're willing to supply that either temporarily, or a lot of them, the stuff just stays here so that our tech support has access to it as well. So basically, people have to want it. We need the manufacturer to have interest in it, to support us, both in having systems that can do it, and in fact, when you get a document that says, well, this is how you control it, very often that is not without its own set of bugs and mistakes, and so you end up working back and forth with them on that. So that's how it ends up. People have to want it. The manufacturer really does. It's really up to the manufacturer. I always say that to people who ask me, I say, if you need a driver for a piece of equipment, that manufacturer itself, or their sales rep, or the distributor, lean on them, because if they come to us and say, here, we need to make this happen, they have the ability to make it happen.
Regarding just the overall development, if one piece of that is missing, for example, maybe there's we have a demand, but maybe not support from the manufacturer, can drivers be written?
They can. It obviously takes longer. One of the things that has to be considered when we're doing that is that sometimes if we don't get that kind of support, then it becomes more a matter of trying to figure that whole protocol out, which means that the time it takes to do it is going to be lengthened significantly. So if that driver now, instead of taking 2-3 weeks to write that driver, is going to take 6 to 8 weeks, boy, that driver, there better be a lot of demand for that driver because that's going to shut that driver writer down for an awful long time. That's why, if you get the support from the manufacturer, it smooths the whole thing out. We can get a lot more drivers out.
If you do happen to run across an area, for example, a piece of equipment that we don't have a driver for, where else can people look for drivers within maybe not RTI, but where else can they possibly get drivers for devices that are not available on our driver store?
Well, if they're not in the driver store, there is a pretty rich set of drivers on the dealer forum in the what's called the unsupported and third-party driver category. The third-party drivers are there. Many of the writers of that driver are other dealers who use that equipment, and the support there has been fairly good. Every once in a while we get a driver writer that disappears, but in general that hasn't happened. The drivers that are referred to as unsupported are drivers that usually have been written by someone here that may be a little out of the normal path of stuff that maybe we didn't have the manufacturer support, or maybe it's limited in some sort of way. And the fact that it's unsupported generally means we would prefer that you not talk to our tech support people about it, because they don't have the information, they don't know that much about that particular driver. Those are usually supported by whoever wrote them on the forum itself. So there's usually a thread for every one of those drivers, and that's the place you can ask questions and deal usually directly with the person who wrote the driver, whether it's one of the RTI engineers or the third-party driver.
Great. And how about, can these guys write the drivers themselves if they have some sort of scripting language or knowledge?
Well, certainly, yeah. You can also, on our website, you can apply for our SDK, our software development kit. The drivers are all written in JavaScript. If you've got some programming knowledge, there's a very simple XML format for creating commands and variables. They're all tied together with JavaScript. If you've got some programming knowledge, yes, that's something that you can probably do yourself. So.
Great. Well, let's start talking specifics regarding why everybody's here today in the AD-64 driver. What was the evolution of that audio distribution? I mean, obviously we had a piece of equipment needed to control it, but what was kind of the steps and the features of the evolution to where we are today?
Well, obviously it's the first of the products to ship was the 84 originally. That was the first driver, the 84 driver. It became the 80X driver at one point when the 88 got released. So it did the 4 or 8 channels, but 4 or 8 zones. It became pretty obvious though that there needed to be a driver that could do bigger projects, that could, that didn't stop at zone 8. So the driver got retooled in a way into a driver that could talk to 8 of them and link them into one system. So the AD-64 driver, which got its name because it could talk to 8 88s at one time, was written that actually can, understands that zone 23 is the third zone of the third unit, that sort of thing. So once we started doing that, and the sheer mass of things available, that driver came out and added a few things that are required in a system like that. The selected zone concept, which lets you decide on a panel which zone you're going to control, rather than having to have 64 pages each controlling a separate zone. You can decide on a single page which zone that page is going to control. That was added. Source and zone tracking, where you have variables that'll tell you when a source is or isn't being used. It gives you events when a source should be turned on and because it's just been picked for the first time, or when it should be turned off because no one's using it anymore. And having that in the driver is important because the source can be essentially abandoned either by source change commands where you're switching away from it, or by power commands where the last zone just got turned off. So any of those can happen. That was where we actually added the doorbell command. The 88 and 4 in hardware have a very useful but pretty simplistic hardware doorbell implementation. Just by logic in the back, you mute the channel. But that doesn't really help you get it to a source that may be playing the doorbell music or whatever the sound is. The doorbell command is a driver-based version of that. Then just recently, with the introduction of the 88X and the 84X, obviously IP control was added. They have Ethernet interfaces now. Zones can be grouped. There's a web interface for configuration, and a lot of this stuff was improved. The doorbell function in particular, the 84 and the 88 didn't have commands that let you change the whole status of a zone. You had to change volume and then change source, which, depending on whether your doorbell or your source was louder, could cause problems because you had to decide which one you were going to change first, volume or source. But now there's a command that does it directly. So, things like that have gone back and been cleaned up. So now, but the main thing was obviously grouping.
And with that, we should probably talk about some of the concepts that might be foreign to some people regarding this. A question in the chat window that came up that I thought was kind of interesting. And when we're talking about the evolution of this driver, it says for the 88, not the 88X, can I group 2 zones? For example, a bedroom and an ensuite.
You can't do that in the driver using the grouping commands in the driver. No. As a matter of fact, the AD-64 driver, the current version of it, is aware of the firmware version and the model number of the devices it's talking to. If there is an 84 or 88 non-X version in the system somewhere, none of those group commands will work on any of the boxes. So there's just no way for it to know on the fly which zones it can use those on and which zones it can't, and keep track of that. So as soon as there's an older device in the system, those commands are disabled and won't work.
However, we could create a macro to have both zones turn on a single button push and things of that nature.
Certainly. In particular, one of the things that the driver has is it will trigger driver events on any command that's being sent to any zone. So if you wanted to if you turn zone 2 on there will be a driver event that says, I turned zone 2 on. Not that it came on, but that you sent a command to turn it on. And you can create a macro just on that one itself to turn on, say, number 3. So that anytime, so you don't actually have to send the macro to both of them. You can just, okay, now I'm turning on zone 2, and then after that, zone 3 just comes along for the ride.
And we're discussing something along the lines of an 88, not the X version that would use the group commands, but a way to utilize an 88 by doing something similar to what a group command would do now that we have the X version. And just for everybody's reference, the 84 and the 88 are discontinued, have been, we've done a running change, and now the 84X and the 88X are available. So those are the ones to pick up. So let's talk a little bit about those concepts that you were mentioning. For example, the selected zone and group, the doorbell, the groups. You talked a little bit about those, but let's give the integrators here kind of an idea on the purpose of these and how we might use them, and maybe some limitations on them. So
the selected zones. The selected in general is a concept that we've put into a lot of drivers. Selected zones, selected groups. In the Sonos driver, there's a selected player, and the Nuvo driver, you'll see that a lot. If a driver can control multiple instances of something, then a lot of times there will be a selected version of it. In the driver area, we have a particular class of commands and variables that we call, that are considered to be view-based. And a view is essentially any remote in the system. Originally they were just the two-way remotes, but actually now all remotes get actually a view number. So what happens is we can actually track which view, which remote, which panel a command comes from, and then create a specific variable, create a variable that has different value for each one of those remotes. So I can say, if I create a view-based selected zone command, I can set that from one of my KX7s, set it to zone 2, and then the selected zone variable will switch to number 2, but the selected zone variable on the other panels are not affected by that. They're only affected by the view or the panel that made that selection. That lets you create a page with a selected zone on it that this zone gets selected at runtime. So when you're on that page, zone 2 is your selected panel. All the commands, if you do selected zone volume up, selected zone volume down, selected zone power, then they'll only work on that selected zone. You can change that selected zone, and now that same page is controlling a different zone or a different player or a different group, depending on what it is. The other panels can set their own selected group, and they'll be controlling a different zone. The thing is, you can actually move those, you can actually take a design then, move it to another panel, just cutting and pasting, not having to change the number. The one in the kitchen, you can put in the one in the living room or the one in the basement, and then as long as the zone gets selected, then that panel controls its own room. So that works for in-wall panels that don't move and don't have to control a lot of rooms. It can also work on an RTI panel that's on a Android or iDevice, walks around, and you can switch the panel on the fly. The problem with that, as I said, is that the command gets to when the command goes to the processor, it has the number of the device that sent it. It knows what device it came from. The problem is, if you create a macro that lives on the processor, then that can be triggered from anywhere. It can be triggered by an event. It can be triggered by one of the sensors. It can be triggered by a timer. It can be triggered by all sorts of things. It doesn't know where it came from. So you have to be very careful. You can't use those commands. You can't use a selected zone command in a macro. Even if you're hitting a button on a panel that actually triggers that macro, that number doesn't get passed through. The macro on the processor doesn't know which panel sent that command. So if you're going to use selected zone volume up commands, they have to go on the button on the panel so that the processor knows where they came from. That's the only limitation to that.
And we talked about groups already and things of that nature. But why don't we open up Integration Designer itself to kind of show what we're talking about with these different concepts and things. I know there's a lot of people out there that may not have ever used the driver. So if we go ahead and open this integration designer up, and what we'll do is we're going to kind of walk through the basic setup of the driver, what's available, and then some different functionality. We'll probably start with some simple selected zone and some of the concepts that we've been talking about. So if I go ahead and open up the 86 or the XP6 I have set up here, where I've already loaded in the driver in the driver's area and have the RTI AD-64. One of the things that we recommend every single time, even if you've been using the driver before or if you're brand new, once you load it in, you really need to click on the Get Info and read the information provided, eloquently written by Paul, to make sure that you understand every single concept and aspect. Because especially if they're a driver that works directly with RTI equipment, we're always going to try and make improvements to it, and this is the best way to be up to date on what those improvements are. So if you've been using the 84 driver forever and then, I've got a new job and I'm going to put in 64 separate zones, well, what for that driver may not be, it may have changed a little bit. So please make sure to read the entire Get information. And sometimes it's a book, sometimes it's a paragraph, but it's important to read this information just so that you have knowledge based around how the driver is set up, what's available in it, how the commands are set up, what the general setup itself is, what the variables mean, things of that nature. So please make sure to read that Get Info. Once you've read that, then it's a matter of going in and working on this setup. So the settings, the connections, etc. So Paul, can you come in and walk us through what these different terminologies mean? And I know some of this is pretty basic, but at the same time it is important knowledge. So.
Well, obviously, devices in use, that's just how many you've got connected there. That's different than the number of zones in use. It actually lets you fill in the information. I'm talking about the devices in use at the time. And you can do, those can be 88s or 84s. And obviously when I say 88 or 84, I mean 88X and 84X as well. But it actually tells it how many ports it's going to need to use. And it actually will give you the ability to enter in the port information for as many as you need. Then once you've got that set up, you tell it whether you're going to control it over the network or control it serially. And then, of course, if it's network, you have to put its IP address in. If it's serial, you tell it what serial port it's going to use. And that's basically just the really rough hardware nuts and bolts of the whole thing. Once you get farther down, the number of zones in use, that has to be in there because you may be working with two 88s, but really only need, like in this example, 14 zones, if that's all you're really using. And particularly when you're using selected zones, you can rotate through the selected zones. And you don't want to go from zone 14 and do selected zone up and go to 15. You want to, because that's not in the system, you want it to go wrap around to 1. And that's how it knows where to wrap around and what to wrap around to when you go down. So after that, source names, group names, and zone names, those actually are part of the dynamic configuration, dynamic naming in the driver, so that over in the variable section and in the command section, instead of saying I want to set zone 32 to source 6, you can say, okay, I want DirecTV 1 in the kitchen. When you put those names in there, it changes what shows up over in the library of commands and variables.
So for example, if I type in 100 and press enter, you'll notice immediately it's changed over here. So DirecTV in 100 in use.
Yeah. Those will also show up as variables in the driver itself, so that as you toggle through or you change a selected source, you can, the name of that source will change as well. So,
and that's true for group names and zone names, correct?
And zone names, yep.
So really, when we're going through this, a question came up: how do you set the IP address in our example here? You're going to set that up in the network. You can either do a DHCP or static. And once you've dedicated either a direct IP address for the unit or for the 88X or 4X, whichever you're using, you'll want to put that specific address in here. Or if it's DHCP, you'll still need to enter it in, correct?
You'll still need to enter it in. If you're going to use DHCP, you're going to want to use your reservation in your router. It's got to stay the same.
We always recommend using static. That way it is maintained the same. But if you do use DHCP, make sure to reserve that in the network, and then you're going to have to pull that up from the network settings or from the web configuration, which we'll show you how to do in a little bit. So yeah, and one of the unique features about Integration Designer that we added in the last year is what's called dynamic naming, so that you notice that as soon as we changed one of this, it automatically changed over here. That's one of the very cool features. Or even in addition, if I were to change the amount of groups to 7 instead of 8, you'll notice that it automatically changes in this area. So you don't have excess amount of information to fill in here, or possibly confuse yourself if you've got, X amount of groups that you're using, or if you're using a Lutron lighting system as an example, where you can have 100 different IDs, where you don't actually need 100, you may only need 50.
And in particular, they don't show up in the variables section, where if every one of those, in this case, if every one of those groups, or in the Lutron situation, every one of those lights has a certain number of variables, you don't want to see the variables for 200 lights when you're only using 30. Sure. So it just prevents you from having to scroll through a mile-long variable list.
Absolutely. So it's one of the very cool features that is in I think almost all the drivers now that we write.
Not some of the older ones. We're picking them up as we go through. We just so as we do updates, yes, that gets added.
Mm-hmm. So now that we've got it set up and you've seen it put it in this particular location here, I'm going to go ahead and why don't we start out with the selected groups. I'm going to go ahead and open up this virtual panel that I've created here. It's a very simplistic example of it, and in this case we're going to use a selected zone, or a selected zone, to choose our zones and then choose our source, and then have that be able to populate the information as well as a overall location information. So in this basic setup, what would be kind of the process to do something like that?
Well, obviously you've already got it set up so that there's page changes in there, but basically the idea is you need to, each one of those rooms that you're picking is going to actually change the zone that this panel is talking to the one that controls that room. So because you've done dynamic naming and you've got a room called master bedroom
or kitchen as an example,
right? So you would go down at the last set of commands is the set selected zone. So you do set selected zone, and then now what you've got there is once again a list that's based on everything you put in the configuration. The zones that you are using, you give them the name of the configuration, and they'll pull up right there. It's much easier to choose kitchen from a pull-down menu than it is to choose number 4. So set it to the kitchen and then drag it over. And now from now on, that is a value that the fact that this is talking to that zone has been selected on this panel. Anytime you use what are called the selected, you send a command to the selected zone, there it's talking about whichever one you set on this panel.
So then as you see here, we've set that selected zone, and then I've already put a page link on here to number 3, assuming most people know how to do that, and it goes to our music sources page where we would actually select the specific one that we want to control. So if we're going to do, instead of in this case just a specific source control, again it would come down to what we want to select. So under the that would be under the
it would be a select source.
There you go.
Source select.
Source select underneath the.
So if you select that command, yes, then you've got 2 selections. You've got a zone. You can either do it for a specific zone, or the top choice is whichever one is selected. Now, once again, that's not a command that you can put in a macro, but it is one you can put on a button. And that choosing selected means rather than a specific talking to a specific zone on that button, you're going to, whichever one you selected on that previous page, that's the one the command is going to be directed to. So if you got there by hitting the kitchen button, or you got there by hitting the living room button, they can both go to this page. The result will be different, but because it'll do the zone that you selected on the previous page.
Perfect. So we have our selected zone, which we did before, and then we're going to go ahead and actually do the RTI dock. And I drag that command over to the iPod here. And as you can see, it's already going to number 4. So essentially what I've got here is the RTI dock, which is going to use the RTI dock driver and populate the information here. But one piece of information that I thought was kind of cool is be able to have something like this where you can actually have the location playing. Because if you've got a zone list like this, be able to populate information here where you can insert a variable for that specific area is kind of a cool feature in my opinion, so that you know where this actual device is playing. So if we were to go ahead and open up that edit text, you'll see that I just put in the words insert VAR for variable. And under here, I'm going to go ahead and select Insert Control Variable, RTI AD-64, and then would I do a specific zone, or would I do the selected zone?
Pick a selected zone.
Exactly.
Because that is all the variables that a zone can have, but actually it's the local copy of the one that's selected on that page.
So it'd be selected zone name then, right? Because that's what we set up before. So now you'll see that it says location playing library, and that's more of just a filler information. But once we've selected our select zone, it will display whatever we've decided that name is in the driver configuration initially, and display it as such here, and play in that specific room. So if we were to go ahead and load this to the file here real quick, and give me one moment as I pull this up. So I'll load in the changes we've made to that AD-64. And then I'm going to launch this virtual panel file. So now if I select music, there's our selection. If I were to select master bedroom, iPod, you'll see that although the area here is not displayed very well, it is giving me full information of what I'm playing in that specific room. So actually, let me go. So as you can see, it would display it there, and I can go ahead and play whatever, or double click. So that's a pretty, I mean, and as we talked about, that's a pretty cut and dry one. Now, if we get into something like this where we're going to have quite a few varieties and quite a few areas here, the driver itself is, once again, based on driver commands as well as the different variables. So we've got a lot of different variables that are going to be associated here. So one on here, or why don't we start with a click to zone to adjust here. On this one, when I open this exact text box up, you'll see that there's some different varieties. So I've already decided which this is going to do and what the variables are going to be. But I could also assign this to have these change as well, correct?
Correct.
So what command would I use to be able to have this, once selected, to change these to that specific zone?
That's going to be the same command. You're going to want to set the selected zone for this panel to master bedroom. So what you end up with in that top left button, you end up with the actual master bedroom versions of those variables, where down on the sliders you actually have the selected zone version of those variables.
So if I was to edit this text, it'll come up with a variable, which you'll now see is selected zone name for what we've already selected, as well as the variable associated with it, selected zone volume. Essentially what this is done now, as Paul said, is when we select this, this will change accordingly, the button text variable, as well as the decibel level, and then this is going to be, like as many of you know already, is going to be a graph data source, and we're going to do the selected zone volume, and we would drag that onto that specific one. So now this will populate and go up and down based on the zone that we've selected. And same holds true for the toggle. Now these are static here, but obviously we would want to assign a toggle button data source for the specific zone in this case, because we want to turn that on and off. So we wouldn't use selected zone. We would actually choose which zone. As you can see, they're listed here. 1, living room. So living room power. Click and drag that onto that. And we could also assign a command for that specific group. So we would find that group itself. Where am I at here?
We still want to be in zone commands.
Oh, excuse me, went too far. It helps if I actually put the proper command on and then set the exact zone that I want to control.
Right.
So if it is going to be living room, as an example here, I would populate this toggle switch with that specific one. So the driver itself, I mean, and that's a pretty straightforward way to look at what this driver is capable of doing on an individual one-on-one type of basis. But when we start talking about setting up groups and group zone commands and things of that nature and having those set up, there's a couple of different ways we can do that. So why don't I go ahead and which one would you like me to pull up here, Paul, to demonstrate? So on this grouping page under the zone control device that we brought up here, we've got a control page, and kind of give us an idea on what do all these numbers mean? What are they looking at? What are we looking for here?
This is the problem with making a sample page for something like the AD-64 is this is not a page that you would end up on a customer's panel. And usually the commands get spread all around, like you saw in the first example we were doing, where selecting a zone is done on one page and actually making it the source is done on another page, and controlling volume might be on another page. This is a great example, and this is actually taken from the sample file for this driver on the iPad version of it. The thing about this page is it lets you see what's going on in almost every variable for the zone for the first 8 channels. So you can see everything that's going on. You can change sources for a channel, for a zone, and for a group. It only allows a single group, which I've actually named party, thinking that this was, like a party mode you were going to create, where when you select that, it toggles that particular zone in and out of the party group. So you can use this page to create a group on the fly and then send various commands to it to see actually what happens. There's a couple different ways to do group commands or to send commands that act differently. So this lets you see what's going to happen. You can send source change groups to source change commands to a zone. You can send them to a group. And there's a third set of commands that are context-based. So you can point them at a zone, and if that zone is not in a group, it'll change the source of that zone. But if that zone becomes part of a group, then those exact same commands go to that whole group instead. So this is a good page to see all that happening on.
So we've got the page here set up. So under the driver commands itself, we've got our zone group context commands, as well as our group commands here. So what kind of ones on this page would be used? I mean, I know we could go through and highlight them.
Yeah, on this page in particular, it's a little bit, like I said, this is not a page you would normally give on a customer's page. And if you look at this page on the sample file that comes with the driver, there's a couple little text balloons, text boxes that kind of show you what's going on. But what we've got right now is the source commands on the Zone 1 are actually the context-based commands. So those, when you first fire it up, it's not in a group. Those will change that zone. When you add it to a group, if you add it to a party group and you use those commands, they'll change all the zones that are in that group. In the second one over, in Zone 2, those are just the standard source select commands. So even if if that gets added to a group, it'll change the source only for that zone. As a matter of fact, because you're forcing a change in the zone, in the source that's selected on that zone using those commands, If you use those commands when it's in a group, it will leave the group because you're telling it to listen to a different source. So a lot of the times you're going to probably want to use the context commands so that it doesn't automatically leave the group, so that you have the choice of when that happens. Like I said, the party mode, the party button that you see on each channel just toggles that group, that zone in and out of the group. The volume controls, this gets a little bit into the whole concept of group volume. Zones that get grouped together, it would be disastrous if you decided, like being all on the same source or like being all on and off together. You don't want them to be all at the same volume level. The volume is very much dependent on the room that you're in, the speakers you're driving, that sort of thing. So when a zone joins the group, it doesn't change volume. So you can create using the same zone volume commands you've always used will change the balance in a group, so that it doesn't disable them at all. Most of the time, that's what you're going to end up wanting to use. Even if you're grouped together where 3 or 4 people are listening together, the people in the kitchen may want to turn theirs down without turning down the same source that the people are listening to in the living room. So the individual zone commands are still operating even in groups to let you adjust the balance between the different zones. There are commands to raise and lower the volume for the whole group. As a matter of fact, there are both commands that do the group volume, commands that do the zone volumes, and once again, there's a context based on whether they're in the group or not. If you adjust volume up and down on a group, then it actually moves all of the volumes, the volume of all of the zones in the group together. It keeps them the same distance apart, it keeps the balance the same between them, but it moves them up and down together. So you can either move the zones individually, or you can move the group as a whole up and down. There's a separate group volume set command which lets you actually set the volume for a group, but that does exactly that. It actually sets every zone in the group to the same volume level, and that is not often something you want to do. Because of that, and because of every zone being at a different volume level, the group volume level is not. It's rarely an indication of the volume. It doesn't match up with any of the zones at all. As a matter of fact, when you're doing volume up and down in groups, the group volume itself doesn't track that. The zones are all at whatever volume they're set at. The group volume really has no validity in that situation, so it's just not tracked. If you're going to move volume up and down in a group, you're going to want to do that on the just up and down commands rather than the set commands, which will destroy the balance of the system you're in and put all the zones at the same level.
Will they continue to rise even if one hits the top?
No, that's actually the limit. When you've got your balance set up, you can go down, up and down on groups, but when the lowest lowest zone in the group hits the bottom, the minus 75 level, then they will no longer go down anymore as a group. Same with the upper level. If you turn them up, and as soon as one of the zones hits the top, the maximum level, the entire group will stop going. There are flags, there are variables for that when a group is at its volume limit, and once again, there's a sample in the selected groups panel on the sample file that actually shows that in a group that you're showing you're changing a group. When you get to the top, the flag goes high, and you can't go any higher than that. You need to use the zone commands at that point to adjust the volume, to adjust the balance, to allow you to turn them up anymore. You can't go up anymore on that one zone.
So essentially, if the group hits a certain level, I can still go around to the individual zones and adjust those to go higher or lower.
Correct.
Just can't do it as a group if one hits the min or the max.
Right. You can't go. Right. You can't go down. Once one hits the minimum, none of them can be reduced anymore.
A question that just came in, I thought it was an interesting one. Is there a visibility flag for group mode being activated or not active?
There's a flag for every group if there is something in the group. So as soon as a zone joins a group, then that group's then that group actually has a variable that shows that it's got. I unfortunately I don't even remember the name of it, but
Selected zone is in a group.
select a zone. No, that would tell you when a zone is in a group. There's if you go down to the group variables, it actually is on this panel that we're looking at as well. On the button that says Clear Party, that there's a variable on that one that as soon as you put something in that group, so you can look at the properties of that one. Variables. There, group. Yeah, the group has members. So once again, that's named party because that's the name of the group. So when that group, the party group, has members, then that will go high. So yes.
Great. And that's a reverse state, but the same would be similar for a visibility state.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you could make the controls for that group invisible until there's something in that group.
All right. So in regards to the selected groups, such as this one here, we look at something like this, and this may not make sense to a lot of people. Obviously, that's not how you may set it up for your clients.
Without a doubt, yes.
But it gives you an idea of what's capable here. So in this case here, what do we have going on?
The groups are available. Once again, we're talking about the selected concept. So in this page, all those variables, which groups have members, what zone is part of that group, whether that group is on, whether that group is muted, and what source it's on, those variables are all, in this case, the variable from the selected group. So the issue then becomes, how do you select that group? You can select that group either by selecting it directly, and that's what those buttons 1 through 8 on the left are. If you want to select, I think it's still probably called the party group. If you want to select the party group, you select that one. If you don't want to have 8 buttons, you just want to be able to rotate through them, that's what the up and down arrows are. If you're on group 1, if you're looking at the status of group 1, you hit the selected group up, then you're now, all those variables, all those buttons in the center will switch to reflect the status of group 2. In addition, all the groups are listed in a scrolling list, which is what's down on the lower left. If you want to just go through and the groups are listed by name and you select it, and now once again the variables in the middle change to reflect the status of the group that you select.
So let's see if we can pull this up in virtual panel.
See if we can pull this off.
And this is the selected groups one.
I don't know why that changed. I don't know what you bungled there.
Appreciate the vote of confidence. All right. So let's see here. The virtual panel should have come up here. Coming up my other screen.
Okay. So right now we're looking at group 1. You see group 1 is highlighted. It's the selected group. And in fact, it's empty. So we have a flag that shows it's empty on the far right-hand side where it says empty. And you can see that none of the, I mean, I only have 28 of them there, but, I think we configured this particular to only have 14. But if you click on number 1, now it's showing you both that it has members. It's actually showing you that now that group actually has, you see in the source, it's on source 1. At the very bottom in the center, you see not only its name, that it's selected the Kaleidoscape, you see that it's highlighted number 1, that's the source, and the number itself is there. You can change that either by selecting those directly. Now, once again, all the power came on. Anytime you change, and this is true whether it's zones or groups, if you change the source, you're turning that zone or that group on. You can select it there. You can actually go over to the list of sources on the right and select a source there. You see how it changed then again in the center, and that's basically it. Yeah, once again, that group is empty. You can see number 1 is still showing you that's the group 1 has members flag, as opposed to what we were looking at over on the right, which now is showing that the selected group is empty. That's the difference between the selected zone version of that variable, which is showing you that number 3 is empty because it's the selected one, and the one that's right next to the left of 1, which is actually the dedicated has members part of number 1. So if when you were on group 3, you had selected, say, zone 4. Now there's zone 4. Now group 4 or group 3 is showing that it has members as well. So it'll show those variables will be active no matter what the selected group is. But there's also one just for the selected particular version.
So if I were to hit group 1 as a button here, you now see that it's dedicated to group 1. Here are all the members that can be added.
Yes.
Here's the sources, otherwise the list for it as well, and then the ability to adjust it, turn it on, turn it off.
And one of the things I always recommend when people are looking at this sort of thing, the panel that we had looked at before, that showed 1 through 8, and in the sample file on an iPad, bring up all the status of 1 through 8, and then you can add groups, zone 1, 2, 3, and 4 to a group, and change the group, and you can see that they all change in the other place. If you're creating 3 or 4 groups and change each one, and you can see what happens on that page. It's easy to see, at least 1/88's worth of variables changing as you do group stuff. At least while you're getting used to it and figuring out how you're going to implement this stuff.
Very cool. Now with the zone control, as we were talking about here, it was something like this, similar to what we were doing before. And maybe we should show something, kind of how this would look and feel as well. So I'm going to go ahead and launch this one as well, the homepage for I should probably close the other one, huh? Otherwise it won't let me.
It won't work.
One moment here, there we go. And we are on zone control. I'm going to go ahead and launch this one to give everybody kind of an idea on the different looks and feels and things like that. So that should have launched here. There we are. Oops. And that didn't disappear for some reason. But you can see all the zones are listed here. So if we're
so as you change them, you've got these two are the same instance as well.
Interesting. But you can see I can adjust the volume, base level, and you can see that this squeeze box is already listed in these 2 zones as well, correct?
Yeah, actually this page, once again, this comes also again from the iPad and the sample file, and it shows what part of the source management essentially that the driver does as well. It knows how many zones and which zones are using a specific source. So if you go to the power and turn this zone off, you see that now nobody's using number 5 anymore. You were on the squeeze box. When the zone is on, turn the zone back on. You can see number 5 highlights, and that's also that going on and off is also accompanied by an event. So you can actually just in a zone choose a source. The driver will send out an event. And you can just create a macro on that event that essentially turns whatever source, your DirecTV box, your whatever you're using, that powers up that source only when it gets picked. And when it's not picked anymore, either by being turned off or being switched to another zone, the driver sends an event when the last last zone unselects that source, and you can use that to turn it off. So you don't have to keep track of your own flags as far as whether to turn that zone on and off. You also see that because just one zone, and right now you can see the number that's by the all zones, the 1 and the 7. The driver keeps track of that. It isn't really important, but I left those variables in there because it actually helps, I think, with the debugging to see as you make changes what happens there. The important thing is when that goes from 0 to 1 and that goes from 1 to 0, you get those events. But there's also the in-use variable that if someone decides to pick a squeeze box number 1, you can actually, in your macro, you can look to see whether squeeze box 1 is actually in use or not. So he went to a second zone, zone 2 now, and picked the squeeze box there. So now it's showing that there's 2 zones that are using that source. As a matter of fact, it used to be using source 1. You can see that it's not 7 anymore. So yeah, as he changes, you can see that happen. And once again, there's driver events that accompany that. And the purpose of those driver events is to power on and off those peripherals, those sources.
And you can see I just simply changed the zone select down here with the arrows and how that's changed based on what it's been selected at. If I select RTI dock, now it's number 8 as having 1 in 1 zone.
If you create a group, you'll then see those numbers change in 2 or 3 chunks at a time. So,
well, why don't we bring up the web interface to kind of show that on a different level as well. So here's an example of the web interface for this specific device, and you can see all I needed to do really to get it going was type in the actual address of it, and it pulled up on this web interface here, giving me all the information regarding it, as well as setting it up on the IP. However I want to have it set, static or DHCP.
The device will also show up in the network section of your of Windows, where you can click it. So it's discovered automatically by Windows. It's very easy to get to just by name.
Great point. And there's also 3 tabs down at the bottom. Network one, obviously we have this where we can name our device, and then the zone tab. What does the zone tab give us here? Everything that we were just talking about, but more of a web interface based around it.
Right.
So being able to take a specific zone 1, and you can see that we've already assigned it number 5. So if we were to go back to that virtual panel, why don't we do that for fun? Hang on, let's pull that up real quick.
Boy, now you're tempting fate.
I know. So we got zone 1. We go back up to zone 1. You'll notice there's number 5 as the source populated in that web interface right there, and it's currently powered on. So we're in good shape. And you can see we can also assign it to a specific group right down below. So we can do it on a web-based interface. And then the third would be the grouping. So if we did assign specific groups or zones into groups, they'll be listed here and tell us what they are. For example, group 3 has zone 4 in it, and what that, as well as power, etc. So you can see what's going on here quick and easy without having to go to, oh, there we go. Finally adjusted on us, 184. That's an interesting number there. But it gives us an easy overview of it without having to deep dive into specific pages or have a complicated page. We can see it in a simplistic format.
Plus, if you're not going to be changing groups on a dynamic basis, if you're not creating party zones or groupings together on the fly, if you have 3 zones that are always going to be grouped, that you want to stay grouped, and you don't even want to give them control of that, then that would be something you'd set up in the group on the web page, and don't put it on a panel somewhere where they could change it. So the web interface works great for that.
A question that came up here real quick, does it support IPv6?
Yeah, I don't even know. That'd be an handy question.
That's a great question.
We'll write that down
and get you that information. Another question that came up: does the web interface have a password?
Yes, it does. RTI. If you go back to the network page, how come we didn't see it? Probably because you were already up before. When you first bring it up. and you go to the zones of the group page, it'll ask you for the password, and the password by default is RTI. So,
Can they change?
I believe you can. Once again, I'm sorry, that's a more of a Andy question, a firmware question. I don't know.
Okay. Oh, these are great questions, and this is why we're hosting these tech talks. I think it's very beneficial to be able to have these. So really what we've kind of talked about here today, is there anything else regarding the programming side of things? I mean, should we kind of review real quick, just a basic idea here, Paul, real quick, the difference between a context command and a standard group command?
Yeah, once again, the main, it lets commands on a button change what they do based on whether or not that zone is part of a group.
And that's the context.
That's the context one. So you can create a command that will only control that zone, and that command is in there that will always control that zone. Or you can create a set of commands that will always control a group. But the context commands, which actually they don't require a group parameter, but you have to assign them to a specific zone. So what they'll do then is they'll change the parameter of that zone, whether it's volume or source or power. If that zone is just all by itself and not in a group, it'll change that zone. But if that zone becomes part of a group, those same buttons will now control that group. And yeah, that's it. So when you add it to a group, it still works, but it works anything. It also controls anything you added to it. If you're doing that on zone 1 and you put that in a group with zone 2, then now those commands, the context commands to zone 1, will now control both of them.
One other question that came up here real quick. Can you set min and max volumes for a zone?
No, there's no parameter. There's no provision for that. Just off the top of my head, I was almost thinking that you could use the grouping commands to prevent it from being able to go down any farther. That's pretty far out there. So I would say in general, no. It's not built in there. There's
other ways we could do it.
There's other ways you could do it. You could use something like the integer helper variable, like we talked earlier about unsupported drivers. There's one there that lets you actually range check. You could use that to look at the volume that zone is currently on, and only allow the up and down to work if it's inside that range. That sort of thing, but it's not built in.
It's not built in, sure. Right. All right. So yeah, really what it kind of comes down to with the AD-64, I guess, is the overall programming itself and what's available to you is quite significant, and we're always making improvements to it and offering things. And the best way to keep it up to speed on those is the regular scheduled trainings that we're going to have, whether they're webinar based or these tech talks that we're going to continue to do. And for those of you that this is a brand new type of format that I'm experimenting with, please let me know what your feedback is. Send me emails at training@rticorp.com and let me know. Some of the best resources that are out there for you. Get on the forum. If you're working with the AD-64 and there's something that isn't working right, you need to let us know. The best way we know how to grow and improve our product line is to hear from you in the field. So get on the forums if you're not on there already, or shoot me an email directly at training@rticorp.com, and I'm happy to present it to where it needs to go, whether it's the AD-64 or any other driver that you're working on. And of course, you can always call tech support. Otherwise, always make sure to get on the mailing list so that we can send you any updates that are coming up with that driver or what is going on with it, the technical bulletins, but be on that forum. So I guess, in summary, the key takeaways really from this is the product, top quality, top quality sound, easy to integrate. We make it simple for you. You saw how the dynamic driver naming and the drag and drop of specific commands, it can be as simple as a specific selection of a zone to doing it in incredible groups. So it's really up to you on how you want to do it. My advice would be take a look at that sample file we really take a long time, or we really take our time in making sure that sample file is easily backwards workable, so you can take a look at the different scenarios and situations and reverse engineer them, so that you can continue to figure out how they work. And please read that Get Info. It gives you a ton of information. That driver offers, like I said before, individual, selectable, group, zone commands, full feedback, everything that you need to satisfy that client's need to be able to control whatever audio is in whatever room of whatever business or home that they are in. So don't be shy. If you've got questions or having problems, let me know, and I will get you taken care of. So with that, thank you very much. Like I said, Paul and I will stay on for another few minutes, for probably another few minutes here, and answer any additional questions that you may have. So thanks very much from RTI, and have a great day.